Welcome to the Fanboy and the Hater,
a podcast hosted and produced by Mike Hall
and Jim Harris, where we discuss the best
and worst
in movies,
TV,
and pop culture. Is animation just for kids? I don't think it is. We have different circles of friends. We have a very nerdy circle of friends where the A word is not a bad word. If you talk about animation, people are interested in it. But I have other friends that equate animation equals kid stuff.
Yeah, that's pretty common thinking. For me, a lot of my favorite stuff is animated. In my mind, cartoon is a kid's version of animation, and then animation is just a wide encompassing anything artistic drawn more or less in any form. There's a lot of animated, very adult-oriented animated stuff. And even a lot of the cartoons, like the more kids stuff, has a lot of adult humor behind it as well, just to make it bearable for the parents while the kids are watching it, I think. But I think it adds another level as well.
Yeah, I agree. Animation in general, I think it's come a long way since when I was growing up. It was very much, animation was considered a children's entertainment. Nowadays we have, I can't help but think of The Simpsons, which has now been on for over 25 years now. So The Simpsons is like mainstream animation. We also have some mainstream that's a bit more adult-oriented, like South Park and Family Guy. But we also have a lot more television networks like Cartoon Network. And yeah, a lot of that stuff is kid-oriented programming. But like I said, even in that stuff, there is things for adults, for the adults that are, unfortunately, watching it with the kids. Because I think a lot of times adults are not watching it with their children because they want to, maybe because they're concerned about their kids, what they're watching, or just to make it more of a family experience. But there definitely are a lot of jokes and a lot of children's programming that are only for kids. Sorry, that are only for adults. Well, there are jokes that are also only for kids, but also jokes only for adults. You had just said earlier that some of your favorite stuff is animated, and I would say that that is also true for me. We are talking about superhero animation in this episode, which some people, even when you bring up superheroes, which we've talked about a lot before, we love the fact that we're living in an era where comic books and superhero movies are more mainstream. So geek and nerd culture in that respect has gone mainstream. I think that's one of the other things that I dislike it in general when people dismiss animation as being childish, or even when people say the same thing about comic books and superhero movies, even the live action movies that have become more mainstream, is that there is still a sophisticated level of writing and character development and plot development. And in some cases, I actually think some of the animated stuff actually has better storytelling and better character and plot development than the stuff that's not geared specifically to children.
I don't really have a lot of evidence to back this up, but I believe when you are writing and working on an animated version of these things, you're spending a lot more time with the characters, and most of the time, the people working on it are big fans of it. Rather than just being hired on just to write this thing, they're big fans of it that want to be involved with it. And that's why you're getting the better and more complete storylines, is because they're fans that understand the characters and where the storylines should go in a better way. And when I say some of my favorite stuff is animated, a lot of it is the superhero stuff. And I think what we run into is when you're trying to adapt something from a comic book into something for TV or movies, live action's restricted simply by you have to try to make people do these weird things that they do in the comic books that isn't physically really possible, and there's limitations to CG. Whereas animated, you can make them actually do it, and there's no limit. You can have Batman jump from rooftop to rooftop across the street, which nobody can actually do that, but it looks okay in animation. It doesn't look as forced as it does in live action.
You don't have to worry about the stuntman getting hurt.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, the laws of physics don't apply in the world of animation, so you can be more imaginative in that, and I think that that opens things up to, and it doesn't necessarily mean it turns it into Wile E. Coyote cartoonish type stuff. I mean, there still can be very well done action sequences done in animation as well. There definitely is animation that is kid-oriented. But for me, when I take a look at animation, I don't see it really as that different of a medium. Because regardless of how you're consuming other television shows that you might be watching or movies, there are characters that are superheroes even though they wear a different type of costume. They have different masks. If you like procedural shows and you see police officers or firefighters or doctors are the heroes, they're wearing costumes and masks too. Spoiler alert, those are actors. They're not really cops, doctors, and firefighters. And we look at those shows where they have aspects of them where they're doing the day-to-day nuances of being a police officer or being a doctor. But there's also like these overarching messages of hope and interpersonal dynamics and conflict. And we look at those shows and we take them seriously. I don't understand why we can't do the same thing with animation. Adult stories may wear different masks, but the messages aren't really all that different. It still comes back to a life lesson by example or allegory. So in the case of the Teen Titans Go versus Teen Titans, one of it was making peace with your own inner demons, the Raven character, trying to be the best version of yourself. You can look at that as the Robins. And even the way that that movie ends, you're a superhero too, in your own weird way. So that whole idea is like, there's not just one way to be a hero. There's not just one way to be a person. There's not just one way to tell a story. And you can have meaningful stories that can connect with you on a human level. Sometimes those are live action shows that we think as grown-up shows. But there's also plenty of shows like that that are animated that may seem at the surface to be more geared towards children. But don't write them off as that. I think that they should be appreciated as a form of entertainment that also can say something meaningful.
The Fanboy and the Hater,
Where we discuss the best
and worst
in movies,
TV,
and pop culture,
we are available on all major podcast platforms,
including Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Spotify, and many more.
Join us while we argue about the things that we love,
Like Star Wars, superheroes, and science fiction.
and the things that we wish were better.
Like Star Wars, superheroes, and science fiction.
So tune in to The Fanboy and the Hater.